Find him. Pamela's voice was no longer strong. It was barely a whisper now, thin and shaky like the flame of a candle about to die. Lakita dropped to his knees beside the mattress. The room was hot, too hot. The zinc roof above them had trapped the afternoon heat inside their one small room in Ajagunla, Lagos, and the air felt thick with sweat, medicine, and fear. A faded curtain hung over the window. A plastic bucket sat near the wall. In one corner, an old black pot rested beside a kerosene stove that had not been used since morning. Nothing in that room looked ready for death. But death was already there. Pamela lay on a thin mattress spread on the floor, her wrapper loose around her weak body, her face sunken, her lips dry. Her once bright eyes looked dim now, but they were fixed on her son, on Lakita, and he held her hand with both of his, as if his grip alone could pull her back. "Mummy, please," he begged, tears streaming freely down his cheeks. "Please don't leave me. Don't leave me alone. I'm here. I'm here with you." Pamela tried to breathe deeply, but the breath caught in her chest. She winced. Lakita leaned closer. She lifted her trembling fingers and touched his face, just once. It was such a small touch, but it broke him. "You are not alone," she whispered. Lakita shook his head like a child, even though he was 23. "I am, Mummy. If you go, I am." Her eyes filled with tears. There was pain in them, yes. But there was something else too. Regret. A regret so old it had lived in her bones. "Listen to me carefully," she said, each word slow like it hurt to bring it out. "There is something you must do for me." Lakita's chest tightened. "Anything. You must find him." His crying paused. "What?" Pamela swallowed hard. "The man who stole my youth, the man who used me and left, the man who knew I was carrying you and turned his back on us." Lakita stared at her through tears. She had never spoken this directly before. All his life, his father had been a shadow, a silence, a wound in the room whenever other boys talked about their dads. Sometimes Pamela called him that man. Sometimes she said nothing at all. And many times, when Lakita asked questions as a child, she only looked away and said, "One day." Now that day had come. Her fingers tightened weakly around his hand. "Promise me," she said, "promise me you will find Dave. Promise me you will not let what he did to us disappear like smoke. Promise me you will make him answer for it." Lakita's mouth trembled. Outside, someone shouted for a keiki. A baby cried from the next compound. Somewhere down the street, loud gospel music played from a small shop radio. Life was continuing, but inside that room, time had stopped. "Mummy, promise me." He bent low over her hand and pressed it against his forehead. His tears soaked her skin. "Mummy, I promise," he said, his voice breaking apart. "I promise I will find the man who ruined your life and mine. I will make sure we get justice. I swear it." Pamela let out a weak breath. A strange peace crossed her face, so soft and so sudden that it frightened him. She looked at him for one long second. Then her fingers went still. Lakita blinked. "Mummy." No answer. He shook her gently. "Mummy?" Nothing. His heart began to pound wildly. "No, no, no, no." He held both her shoulders and shook harder, panic swallowing his voice. "Mummy, Mummy, talk to me. I've promised you, so wake up." But Pamela did not move. Her eyes remained half open, but there was no more pain in them now. There was no more anything. Lakita let out a scream so raw that it rushed out of the room and into the compound like fire. "Help me! Somebody help me! My mother!" Neighbors ran in at once. First was Mama Ijoma from the next room, tying her wrapper as she hurried in. Behind her came old Baba Saliu from the front compound, then two young women who sold puff-puff at the junction. The room became crowded, then silent. Everybody knew. Mama Ijoma placed a hand over her chest. "Chai." Baba Saliu lowered his head. One of the women started crying quietly. Lakita was still clutching Pamela's body, his face buried against her shoulder, his whole body shaking. He could not hear the words around him. He could not hear the prayers. He could not hear the soft voices telling him to stand up, to let them straighten her body, to breathe. He only heard the last thing she had said. "Find him." And for the first time in his life, that faceless man had a name that felt like poison. Dave. 3 days earlier, Pamela was still alive. Weak, but alive. She had been coughing for weeks. At first, she brushed it aside. She called it ordinary stress. Then she called it catarrh. Then she started hiding the blood. Likita noticed anyway. He noticed everything about his mother because he had learned to. He noticed how she pressed a cloth to her mouth before going outside so nobody would see. He noticed how she rested after sweeping the compound, though she used to finish that work without stopping. He noticed how her slippers dragged across the floor at night. He noticed how she smiled a little too quickly whenever he asked if she was okay. Pamela had spent most of her life pretending to be stronger than she was. That was how she survived. She washed clothes for richer families in Apapa. She sold akara in the mornings when she had enough beans. She mended torn uniforms for children in the neighborhood. She did whatever came her way. Some weeks they ate rice, some weeks it was only Gary and groundnut. Some days it was hope, and yet she still tried to laugh. And that was the part that broke Likita the most when he looked back. Even with all that pain sitting inside her, she still laughed. One evening, just before the rain started, Likita returned from a mechanic workshop in Oril where he had been learning panel beating and small engine repairs. His palms were dark with grease. His shirt smelled of fuel and hot metal. He pushed the door open and found Pamela sitting on the mattress, staring at an old nylon bag in her lap. Not just any bag, a brown, worn-out bag with one broken zipper. He had seen it all his life, tucked away under their mattress or hidden in a corner, but she almost never opened it. Until that evening. "Mummy?" he said softly. She looked up too fast and zipped the bag shut. "It's nothing." Likita frowned. "You've been crying." "No. Oh, I haven't." "You have." She tried to smile. "Since when did you become my father?" He dropped his small food flask on the floor and sat beside her. "Since the day life refused to give me one." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Pamela became still. Likita immediately regretted it. "Mummy, I didn't mean—" But Pamela only shook her head slowly. "You did mean it. And you were right." Rain began to tap softly on the roof. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Pamela placed her palm on the old bag and said in a quiet voice, "There are things inside here that belong to your beginning." Likita turned to look at her properly. "What do you mean?" She did not answer at once. Her eyes stayed on the bag. Her face had changed. Not weak this time. Not tired. Haunted. "He was not always a monster when I knew him," she said at last. "That is what makes some wounds harder to carry." Likita's breath caught. He knew at once who she meant. His father. The man she almost never mentioned. "He was kind when we met," Pamela continued. "Or maybe he only knew how to look kind. There is a difference. I was too young to know that." She gave a small, bitter laugh, then coughed into her hand. Likita reached for her, but she waved him off. "What's his name?" he asked quietly. Pamela looked at him. For one long second it seemed like she might finally say everything. But instead she stood up too quickly, stumbled and nearly fell. "Mummy!" Likita caught her just in time, and as he held her upright, the old bag slipped from her hand, hit the floor and burst open. Letters spilled out. A photograph slid across the room, and when Likita picked it up, his heart stopped. Because the young man standing beside his smiling mother in that old picture was wearing a neat university shirt, one hand around her shoulder, and on the back of the photo, in faded blue ink, were the words. Likita slowly turned the picture over in his shaking hands. Behind him, Pamela whispered, "Close the door." And the way she said it made the whole room suddenly feel dangerous. Very dangerous. Because for the first time, the ghost had a face. The rain outside grew louder. Drops struck the zinc roof like tiny stones, filling the small room with a restless sound. Likita stood frozen where he was, still staring at the photograph in his trembling hands. The young man in the picture looked confident, clean, important. His arm rested easily around Pamela's shoulder. They looked happy. Too happy. Likita's chest tightened. All his life he had imagined his father as a monster from the beginning. A cruel man with a wicked face and empty eyes. But the man in this photograph looked normal. almost gentle. It made the betrayal feel worse. Behind him, Pamela whispered again, weaker this time. "Close the door, Lakita." He slowly walked to the door and pushed it shut. The noise of the rain became softer but heavier somehow, like the world outside was leaning against their little room. When he turned back, Pamela was sitting on the mattress again, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. The brown bag lay open on the floor between them. Letters were scattered everywhere. Lakita knelt down and picked one up. The envelope was yellow with age, and the edges were soft from years of being touched. On the front was Pamela's name, written in careful handwriting. Inside was a folded letter. His hands shook as he opened it. He began to read. "My sweet Pamela, I still cannot believe how lucky I am that you said yes to me yesterday. When you walked into that lecture hall, I swear the entire room became brighter. One day, when I become somebody important, I will marry you properly and give you the life you deserve." Lakita stopped reading. His jaw tightened. He grabbed another letter. "I am preparing for an opportunity in Abuja. Politics is opening doors for me. When everything settles, I promise I will send for you. We will not stay poor forever." Another letter. "Pamela, please understand. Things are complicated right now. I need time." Another. "Do not come to my house again. You are making things difficult." Another. "Stop calling me. I have moved on." Lakita's breathing grew louder. By the time he reached the last letter, his hands were shaking violently. The final message had no greeting, just one cruel sentence, written quickly. "That child cannot be mine." The room felt smaller, the air felt thick. Lakita slowly lowered the letter and looked at his mother. Pamela had been watching him read. Her eyes were filled with quiet sorrow. "I wanted to burn those letters many times," she said softly, "but something in me refused." Lakita swallowed hard. "You loved him." It was not a question. Pamela nodded slowly. "I loved him with the kind of love that makes you blind." She leaned back against the wall, her breathing shallow. "He was a final-year student at the University of Lagos when I met him. I worked in a small canteen near the campus. I was saving money for nursing school." Her lips trembled faintly. "He used to come every afternoon to buy rice and stew. At first he only smiled, then he started staying to talk. Soon he started walking me home." The rain outside softened into a steady whisper. Lakita sat quietly, listening. Pamela stared at the roof as if watching old memories float across it. "He told me he came from a poor family. He said he understood struggle. He said he would never forget where he came from." She let out a weak laugh. "Men say many beautiful things when they want your heart." Lakita clenched his fists. "So when did he change?" Pamela looked down at the letters scattered on the floor. "Oh, when power found him." Lakita frowned. "What do you mean?" Pamela coughed slightly before answering. "He began moving with politicians, big men. They liked his intelligence and his smooth talking. Soon he was attending meetings, traveling, shaking hands with people who owned big houses and expensive cars." Her eyes dimmed. "Then he started being ashamed of me." Lakita felt something cold crawl through his chest. "He stopped coming to the canteen," Pamela continued. "When he did come, he told me to meet him somewhere else so his new friends would not see me." She wiped a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "But I still believed him." Lakita whispered, "Until you got pregnant." Pamela nodded. "When I told him about the baby, he was quiet for a long time." She paused. Then her voice became faint. 3 days later, and he told me he had never touched me." Lakita's heart slammed painfully against his ribs. "That bastard." Pamela closed her eyes. "I went to his family house in Surulere to beg him to talk to me properly." Lakita leaned forward. "What happened?" Pamela opened her eyes slowly. "His mother looked at me like I was dirt." Her voice cracked slightly. "She said girls like me trap men with pregnancy every day. She told the security guard to throw me out." Lakita felt heat rising through his entire body. "So he just left you like that?" Pamela shook her head slowly. "No." She looked at him carefully. "He did worse." Lakita waited. Pamela's lips trembled. "He told everyone I was a liar." Silence filled the room. The rain had stopped now. Outside, a generator started somewhere in the compound, humming like a tired animal. Lakita stared down at the photograph again. Young Pamela. Young Dave, laughing together under bright campus lights. How did he become a minister? Lakita asked quietly. Pamela looked toward the small window. He climbed. How? She hesitated, then she whispered something that made the air in the room suddenly heavy. He knows secrets. Lakita frowned. What secrets? Pamela slowly shook her head. I never knew the details, but powerful men trusted him because he knew things that could destroy people. Lakita's stomach twisted. So he used people, climbed into power, and forgot the woman he destroyed. Pamela reached out and held his hand. No. Lakita looked up. Her eyes were filled with a strange sadness. He did not forget. Lakita blinked. What? Pamela squeezed his fingers weakly. He knew exactly where I was. Lakita's heart stopped. What do you mean? Pamela's voice was barely a whisper now. 2 years after you were born, a black car came to this compound. Lakita leaned forward. Who was inside? Pamela stared at the wall as if seeing that moment again. Dave's driver. Lakita's pulse began to race. What did he want? Pamela closed her eyes. He brought money. Lakita froze. How much? Pamela's lips trembled, enough to make me disappear quietly. Lakita slowly stood to his feet. And you refused? Pamela nodded. I told him my son was not a mistake to be paid off. The room felt electric now. Lakita turned back toward the old bag. So that's it? Pamela looked confused. What? Lakita picked up the photograph again. His eyes were no longer the eyes of a grieving boy. They were something else now, sharp, burning. You kept these letters, the photo, the address. Pamela nodded slowly. I knew one day you would ask. Lakita reached into the bag and pulled out a small folded paper. His heart skipped when he read the writing. Dave B., Maitama, Abuja. An old address. But it was enough. Lakita looked back at his mother. His voice was quiet. But you never told me his name. Pamela gave a sad smile. I hoped you would grow up without hate in your heart. Lakita stared at the paper, then he looked at the photograph again. The smiling young man, the liar, the minister, his father. A slow anger began to spread through his chest like fire finding dry wood. Mummy, he said quietly. Pamela looked at him. Do you want justice? She hesitated, and then she whispered something that changed everything. I want the truth to stop hiding. Lakita nodded slowly, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. Not revenge, something colder, something sharper. He folded the photograph carefully and placed it inside his pocket. I will find him. Pamela watched him with tired eyes. You are only 23, Lakita. Yes. He is a powerful man now. I know. He has connections. I know. Pamela's voice trembled. He could destroy you. Lakita looked at the door, then he looked back at her, and the quiet determination in his eyes made Pamela's breath catch, because she suddenly realized something terrifying. Her son was no longer just the boy she raised. He had become something else, something stubborn, something fearless, and something that might shake the life of a powerful man. And Lakita had no idea yet that finding Dave would drag him into a storm of politics, power, and secrets far darker than he imagined. The real danger had not even begun, and somewhere far away in Abuja, Dave was preparing to give a speech that would soon make him one of the most powerful men in the country. Just as a young man he had abandoned was about to start hunting for him. The bus from Lagos to Abuja left before sunrise. Lakita sat by the window, his small black backpack resting on his lap. The bus engine rattled loudly, and the smell of diesel filled the cool morning air. Around him, passengers murmured softly or slept with their heads leaning against the seats. But Lakita could not sleep, not even for a minute. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark road rushing past the window. The photograph was still in his pocket. Every few minutes, he touched it, just to make sure it was still there. His mother had been buried 4 days earlier, 4 days since she died in his arms. 4 days since he made the promise, and now he was on his way to find the man who had caused it all. Dave. The name echoed in his head like a drumbeat. Dave. 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 The bus bounced over a pothole, shaking the passengers awake. A woman across the aisle adjusted her baby on her back. An old man coughed and wiped his face with a handkerchief. Life kept moving, but Likita felt like he had stepped into a different world. A world where everything had suddenly become sharp and serious. As the sun began to rise, the road widened. And tall buildings slowly appeared in the distance. Abuja, the capital city. Clean roads, wide bridges, glass buildings that reflected the bright sky. To someone from Ajegunle, Abuja looked like another country. Likita stepped off the bus at the busy park in Utako. Cars moved smoothly across wide roads. Men in suits walked quickly with briefcases. Expensive jeeps passed by without slowing down. Everything looked polished, powerful. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the old piece of paper again. Dave B. Maitama, Abuja. The address was old. Pamela had warned him that Dave had probably moved long ago, but it was a start. Likita walked through the crowded motor park until he found a taxi driver leaning against his car. "Sir," Likita said politely, "can you take me to Maitama?" The driver looked at his worn clothes and dusty shoes. Then he shrugged. "If you can pay." Likita nodded. The taxi drove through Abuja's wide streets. They passed government buildings with high fences, luxury hotels, and quiet neighborhoods filled with large houses hidden behind tall gates. Likita stared out the window. This was the world his father had chosen, a world far away from leaking roofs and thin mattresses. When they reached Maitama, the taxi slowed near a quiet street lined with tall trees and expensive houses. The driver pointed to a large compound with a cream-colored wall and black iron gate. "That's the address you gave." Likita stepped out of the car slowly. His heart began to pound. The house behind the gate was enormous, a 3-story mansion. Had security cameras sat on the walls. A black SUV was parked in the driveway, and standing beside the gate was a tall security guard wearing a dark uniform. Likita walked forward. Each step felt heavier. The guard raised his hand immediately. "Stop there." Likita stopped. "Yes, sir." "What do you want?" Likita swallowed. "I'm looking for Mr. Dave." The guard frowned. "Which Dave?" Likita hesitated. "Dave B." The guard stared at him for a moment. Then he laughed softly. "Boy, do you know who you are talking about?" Likita's chest tightened. "Yes." The guard crossed his arms. "That is Honorable Minister David Balogun." The name hit Likita like a slap. Minister. His father. The guard continued. "And this is not a place where you just walk in and ask for him." Likita's voice stayed calm. "Then I need to see him." "For what?" Likita hesitated. The words felt heavy in his throat, but he forced them out. "I'm his son." The guard stared at him. For a moment, the man looked confused. Then he burst into laughter, a loud, mocking laugh. "You people don't get tired of this story." Likita blinked. "What do you mean?" The guard shook his head. "Every year, someone comes here claiming to be the minister's child." Likita felt a cold chill move through his chest. "How many?" The guard shrugged. "Too many." The words sank slowly. Too many. That meant one thing. Dave had lived a life full of secrets. Likita reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. He held it up. This was taken 23 years ago. The guard leaned closer. His laughter slowly stopped. And because the young man in the photograph looked exactly like the powerful minister whose face appeared regularly on television. The guard frowned. "Where did you get this?" Likita's voice was steady. "My mother." "Who is she?" "Pamela." The guard looked uncomfortable now. He shifted his weight. "Wait here." He disappeared inside the compound. Likita stood by the gate alone. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. His heart kept pounding. Finally, the gate opened again. But it wasn't the guard who came out. It was a woman in a dark suit. Her posture was straight. Her face was sharp and serious. She looked like someone who handled problems. Big problems. "Are you the one asking about Minister Balogun?" she asked. "Yes." She looked him up and down. "Who are you?" Lakita took a slow breath. "My name is Lakita. And? My mother's name was Pamela." Something flickered across the woman's face, a small reaction, very small, but Lakita noticed. "Pamela who?" she asked carefully. "Pamela Okeke." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Lakita continued. "She died 4 days ago." Silence. The woman folded her arms. "What exactly do you want?" Lakita held up the photograph. "I want him to know his son came looking for him." The woman stared at the photo again. Then she said something quietly. "That will not happen." Lakita blinked. "What?" "The minister is a very busy man, and he does not meet strangers who appear with old photographs and stories." Lakita felt anger rising. "This is not a story." The woman's voice hardened. "Then take it to court." Lakita stared at her. "Ha what?" "If you believe he is your father," she said calmly, "file a legal case." The word stunned him. For a moment he said nothing. Then something inside him clicked. Court, justice, truth. The woman thought she was dismissing him, but instead, she had just shown him the door he needed. Lakita slowly nodded. "Okay." The woman seemed surprised by how calm he was. "Okay?" she repeated. "Yes." He placed the photograph back in his pocket. Then he said quietly, "I will." The woman turned and walked back toward the gate, but before it closed completely, she stopped. She looked back at him once more, then she said something that sent a chill through his entire body. "You should go back to wherever you came from, young man." Lakita frowned. "Why?" Her eyes were cold now. "Gee, because men who challenge powerful people often disappear." The gate slammed shut. Lakita stood alone on the quiet Abuja street. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he smiled. Not a happy smile, a determined one, because now he understood something important. This fight would not be simple, but he was no longer afraid. He reached into his pocket again and held the photograph of Pamela and Dave under the bright Abuja sun. "Mummy," he whispered softly, "I've found him." But what Lakita did not know was that inside the mansion behind that gate, Minister Dave Balogun was already staring at a security camera screen showing the young man outside. And for the first time in 23 years, the powerful minister felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Fear. 2 days passed, too long, in restless days in Abuja. Lakita slept in a cheap lodge near Wu's market, the kind of place where the fan made more noise than wind and the walls were thin enough to hear the next room breathing. But sleep rarely came. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother's face, the thin mattress, her trembling hand, and the promise. Find him. He turned those words over and over in his mind like a stone. And the more he thought about them, the clearer one truth became. A powerful man like Dave Balogun would never accept a poor boy knocking on his gate. Not quietly, not without pressure, not without witnesses. That was when Lakita remembered something Pamela had once said years ago. When the powerful lie, the only thing they fear is the truth in public. So Lakita went looking for people who made powerful men uncomfortable. One human rights activists. It took a whole morning. He asked questions at newspapers, he asked taxi drivers, he asked a woman selling roasted corn outside a radio station. Eventually, someone pointed him toward a small office in Area 11, where a well-known activist worked. Her name was Barrister Aisha Bello. The building looked ordinary, a faded white office block with cracked tiles at the entrance and posters about justice and corruption pasted on the walls. Lakita stood outside for a moment, gathering courage. Then he walked in. Inside, the office was small but busy. Files were stacked everywhere. 2 young volunteers typed on laptops, while a man argued on the phone about illegal demolitions in Kaduna. At the center desk sat a woman in her early 40s. Dark skin, sharp eyes, neatly braided hair tied back. She looked like someone who had spent years fighting battles. She looked up when Lakita approached. "Yes?" Lakita cleared his throat. "My name is Lakita." She nodded once. What can I do for you, Likita? He took a deep breath. Then he said something that made the entire room fall quiet. I want to expose a federal minister. The volunteers stopped typing. The man on the phone slowly lowered it from his ear. Aisha Bello leaned back in her chair. That is a serious statement. Likita nodded. I know. Which minister? Likita swallowed. David Balogun. The room froze. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow down. Aisha studied him carefully now. Do you understand the kind of accusation you are making? Yes. Then you should know something, she said calmly. He is one of the most powerful men in this government. Likita nodded again. And I am his son. The silence that followed was so thick it almost hurt. Aisha blinked slowly. I'm sorry. What? Likita reached into his bag and pulled out the photograph. Then he placed the letters on her desk. These are from 23 years ago. She picked them up, one by one. Her eyes scanned the handwriting, the promises, the rejection, the final cruel sentence. That child cannot be mine. When she finished reading, she looked up again. And your mother? Likita's voice became softer. She died last week. Aisha said nothing. He continued. She raised me alone in Ajagunle. She worked until her body could not work anymore. His hands clenched slightly. And the man who did this became a federal minister. Aisha leaned back again. Her mind was clearly moving fast now. This case will not be simple, she said. I know. They will deny everything. I know. They will try to silence you. I know. Aisha studied his face carefully. What exactly do you want? Likita's answer came without hesitation. Justice. She looked down at the letters again. Then she said quietly, if what you are saying is true, this could become a national scandal. Likita nodded. That is the point. Aisha stared at him for a moment longer. Then she slowly smiled. Not a happy smile. A dangerous one. Good. The press conference was announced the next morning. Word spread quickly. Journalists arrived from several media houses, cameras, microphones, lights. The small hall at the Human Rights Foundation office filled up faster than anyone expected. Some reporters whispered among themselves. Others checked their phones. Because the rumor spreading through Abuja sounded unbelievable. A young man was accusing a sitting federal minister of abandoning his mother and child. Likita stood quietly behind the small podium. His heart beat loudly inside his chest, but his face remained calm. Aisha stepped forward first. She tapped the microphone. Good afternoon. The room fell silent. My name is Barrister Aisha Bello, and today we are presenting a matter that raises serious questions about responsibility, justice, and the abuse of power. Cameras clicked. Aisha gestured toward Likita. This young man beside me is named Likita Okeke. Likita stepped forward slowly. Flashlights burst from cameras. Aisha continued, Likita claims to be the biological son of Honorable Minister David Balogun. Gasps spread through the room. A journalist raised his hand immediately. Barrister, that is a huge accusation. Aisha nodded. Yes, which is why we have evidence. She held up the photograph. More camera flashes exploded. Taken 23 years ago. Then she raised the letters. Written by the minister himself. The journalists leaned forward eagerly. Aisha's voice grew stronger. The woman in this photo, Pamela Okeke, recently passed away after spending 23 years raising a child abandoned by a man who went on to become one of the most powerful figures in this country. She paused. Then she said something that shook the entire room. We are formally demanding a DNA test. The hall erupted with voices. Questions flew from every direction. Has the minister been contacted? What if he denies everything? Do you have proof of paternity? Aisha raised her hand. We are giving the minister the opportunity to clear his name through science. She pointed toward Likita. If he refuses, the public will decide what that means. All cameras turned toward Likita. For a moment he froze. Then he stepped closer to the microphone. His voice was quiet, but steady. My mother died with one regret. The room became silent again. She regretted trusting a man who promised her the world, and then erased her existence. Lakita swallowed. But before she died, she asked me to find him. He looked directly into the cameras now. And today I have. The room held its breath. Lakita finished with one final sentence. Minister David Balogun, if you are watching this, I am your son. Across the city, inside a luxurious office in Maitama, the television was on. Minister David Balogun sat perfectly still in his chair as the press conference replayed on the screen. His face had lost its color. The photograph appeared on the TV again. Young Dave, young Pamela. His fingers slowly tightened around the armrest. His political advisor stood beside him, pale. Sir, this is going viral. Dave's voice was low. How many stations are showing it? Almost all of them. The advisor swallowed. And social media is exploding. Dave stared at the screen. Then he whispered something that made the room colder. Prepare the legal team. The advisor nodded quickly. But Dave added one more sentence. Quiet. Deadly. And find out everything about that boy. Because if Lakita believed this fight would end with a press conference, he had no idea what kind of war he had just started, and somewhere in Abuja, powerful men were already planning how to make the problem disappear. Mr. Lakita Okeke, the court is ready. The courtroom in Abuja was silent. Too silent, the kind of silence that sits heavily in the air before something important happens. Lakita stood slowly from the wooden bench where he had been sitting. His hands felt warm, but his heart was steady. The journey that had started in a small one-room house in Ajagunle had brought him here, to the Federal High Court, the same city where the man who ruined his mother's life had built his power. Across the courtroom sat Minister David Balogun. But he did not look like the powerful man people saw on television, not anymore. His shoulders were stiff, his expensive suit looked perfect, but his face showed something deeper, fear mixed with anger. The press filled the back rows of the courtroom. Cameras waited outside the building. The whole country was watching now. The story had exploded across Nigeria, a poor young man challenging a federal minister and refusing to be silent. The judge entered the courtroom. Court rise. Everyone stood. Lakita lifted his head slowly. For a brief moment, he thought of his mother, Pamela. He imagined her sitting somewhere quietly, watching this moment. And he whispered inside his heart, Mummy, we are almost there. The legal battle had been brutal. Dave's lawyers tried everything. At first, they said the story was false. Then they said the letters could be forged. Then they said the photograph proved nothing. But the pressure from the public kept growing. Television debates, social media outrage, women's rights groups demanding accountability. People began asking a dangerous question. How many powerful men had abandoned children and escaped responsibility? The government could not ignore it. Finally, the court ordered the only thing that could settle the truth: a DNA test. The result arrived 2 weeks later, and when the envelope was opened inside the courtroom that day, the truth came out like thunder. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The entire courtroom gasped. Dave Balogun closed his eyes slowly, because the lie he had buried for 23 years was now standing in the middle of the nation. Alive, named, unavoidable. Now the final judgment day had come. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading the ruling. His voice echoed calmly through the courtroom. This case is not only about biology. The room remained silent. It is about responsibility. He looked toward Dave. The defendant abandoned the mother of his child despite knowing about the pregnancy. Evidence presented shows repeated rejection, emotional harm, and refusal to acknowledge parental duty. Dave stared at the table. His lawyers looked defeated. The judge continued, "The consequences of this abandonment contributed significantly to the suffering and eventual death of Pamela Okeke, who spent 23 years raising the child alone under severe hardship." Lakita's throat tightened. He felt something rise in his chest. Not anger, something deeper. Grief. The judge paused before reading the final words. This court finds Honorable David Balogun guilty of parental abandonment, emotional neglect, and abuse of power to avoid responsibility. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Then came the sentence. David Balogun is hereby sentenced to 15 years imprisonment and permanently disqualified from holding public office. Gasps erupted. Outside the courtroom, journalists shouted as the news spread instantly. A powerful minister had fallen, and a poor young man had brought him down. Dave slowly looked up. His eyes met Lakita's for the first time since the trial began. There was anger there. But there was something else too. Regret. Too late. Much too late. Security officers stepped forward and placed handcuffs on him. As they began to lead him away, Dave suddenly stopped. He turned back toward Lakita. For a moment, the courtroom fell quiet again. Dave's voice was rough. "I was going to offer you money." Lakita said nothing. Dave continued. 200 million naira. Several people in the courtroom gasped. The judge frowned. Dave shook his head slowly. "But you refused." Lakita finally spoke. "Yes." Dave looked confused. "Why?" Lakita's answer came quietly. "Because this was never about money. It was about my mother." Dave said nothing after that. The guards led him away, and just like that, the powerful man disappeared through the courtroom doors. Outside the court building, the crowd of journalists rushed toward Lakita. "Lakita! Lakita! Over here! Do you feel satisfied with the judgment? Do you regret refusing the settlement money? Do you think this case will change Nigeria?" Lakita stood quietly for a moment. The sun above Abuja was bright, warm. He took a deep breath. Then he said the only thing that mattered. "I made a promise to my mother." The cameras flashed. "And today, I kept it." That evening, Lakita traveled back to Lagos. Not to Ajagunle, but to a quiet cemetery where Pamela had been buried. The sky was turning orange as the sun began to set. Lakita stood beside the simple grave. The wind moved softly through the trees. He placed the photograph of Pamela and Dave gently on the grave. For the first time since her death, his chest felt lighter. "Mummy," he whispered, "it's finished." He knelt beside the grave and touched the soil. "You are not forgotten." The wind blew softly again, almost like a response, and for the first time in weeks, Lakita smiled. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.